Marcus Chun pressed his palms against his tired eyes, watching the atmospheric readings scroll endlessly across his monitor. The numbers blurred together oxygen levels, particulate counts, pressure differentials, all within normal parameters for the third consecutive hour. Outside the reinforced windows of Station Epsilon 7, the storm raged with prehistoric fury, lightning illuminating the swirling purple clouds of Kepler 442b's hostile atmosphere. The night shift at the atmospheric processing facility was supposed to be quiet. Most of the colonists were asleep in the sealed habitat domes below, trusting that people like Marcus would keep the air breathable and the storms at bay. He'd taken this job specifically for the solitude no teams to manage, no lives directly in his hands, just data streams and maintenance alerts that could be handled with clinical detachment. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he sipped it anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. The chronometer read 2:47 Standard Time. Another 5 hours until morning shift arrived. Another 5 hours of blessed isolation in his climate-controlled tower above the chaos. A sharp sound cut through the steady hum of processors and ventilation systems. Marcus froze, cup halfway to his lips. 3 deliberate knocks echoed from the station's entrance impossible, since the outer doors were sealed against the toxic atmosphere. No one could survive out there without a full environmental suit, and the nearest habitat dome was 15 kilometers away. The knocking came again. 3 measured beats that seemed to pierce straight through the reinforced walls. Marcus stood slowly, his chair creaking in the silence. Security protocols demanded he alert colony control before investigating any unauthorized presence. But something about the sound patient, almost resigned, made him hesitate. He pulled up the external camera feeds instead. The main entrance showed nothing but swirling gas and debris. The secondary airlock cameras revealed the same emptiness. But the auxiliary emergency port, barely used since construction, displayed a figure hunched against the door. The image quality was poor through the storm interference, but Marcus could make out someone in what looked like improvised environmental protection plastic sheeting, crude breathing apparatus, clothing that seemed more desperation than design. His training screamed danger. Unauthorized personnel, possible contamination, breach of security protocols. But something deeper, more human, whispered that whoever was out there wouldn't survive much longer in the toxic storm. Marcus found himself walking toward the auxiliary port before he'd consciously decided to move. The emergency airlock was small, designed for maintenance access rather than personnel entry. He initiated the decontamination sequence and watched through the porthole as the outer door cycled open. The figure stumbled inside immediately, moving with the jerky desperation of someone fighting unconsciousness. As the decontamination mist cleared, Marcus saw her clearly for the first time. She was humanoid, but definitely not human. Her skin had a subtle blue-green tint that seemed to shimmer in the harsh LED lighting. Long silver hair hung in wet tangles around her face, and when she looked up at the inner airlock window, her eyes were large and dark, with an almost liquid quality that spoke of adaptation to low-light environments. Her improvised environmental suit was falling apart, held together with what looked like salvaged tape and determination. The inner door hissed open, and she collapsed to her knees on the metal flooring, gasping. Her breathing was labored but steady. The atmosphere mixture was compatible, at least. "Please," she said, and her voice carried a musical quality despite her exhaustion. "I have 3 credits. Standard currency. I need shelter. A shower. Somewhere safe until the storm passes." Marcus stared down at her, his mind racing through protocols and procedures. Harboring undocumented aliens was a serious violation. His job, his security clearance, his carefully constructed isolation, all of it could disappear with one poor decision. But she was looking at him with those strange, beautiful eyes, and he could see her trying not to shake with cold and fear. "How did you get here?" he asked, crouching down to her level. The nearest settlement is 15.7 kilometers southeast, she finished. I walked. Took me 6 hours through the storm. Your station showed up on emergency broadcast frequencies. I followed the signal. She fumbled with what remained of her protective gear, pulling out a small credit chip. Her fingers were long and elegant, with subtle webbing between them, another adaptation that marked her as distinctly non-human. 3 credits, she repeated, holding the chip toward him. It's all I have left. Please. Marcus looked at the chip, then at her face. Behind the alien features, he recognized something achingly familiar, the expression of someone who had run out of options, who was asking for help from a stranger because there was literally nowhere else to go. He'd seen that expression in mirrors too many times to count. Keep your credits, he said, standing and offering her his hand. Come on. Let's get you warmed up. She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Then she took it, her fingers surprisingly warm against his palm, and let him help her to her feet. I'm Marcus, he said, as he led her deeper into the station. Kira, she replied, and even through her exhaustion, he could hear gratitude in her voice. Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone would ... double quotes. The shower's this way, Marcus said, cutting off what sounded like it might become an emotional breakdown. He wasn't good with emotional breakdowns. Water's recycled but clean. There should be some spare clothes in the emergency locker that might fit. As they walked through the sterile corridors of the processing station, Marcus caught glimpses of her in the polished metal surfaces. She moved with a fluid grace despite her exhaustion, and when lightning from the storm outside briefly illuminated the windows, her skin seemed to glow with a subtle bioluminescence. He realized he was staring and forced himself to focus on practical matters. Where she would sleep, what he would tell morning shift if they arrived early, how he would explain the presence of an undocumented alien to colony control. But beneath the practical concerns, something else stirred a curiosity he hadn't felt in years, a sense that his carefully ordered world was about to become much more complicated. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that didn't terrify him. The shower turned on with a mechanical hiss, steam beginning to fog the small bathroom's mirror. Kira stood in the doorway, still clutching her 3 credits, still looking at him like he might change his mind at any moment. Take your time, Marcus said softly. I'll be in the main control room when you're ready. She nodded, those dark eyes never leaving his face. Marcus, she said as he turned to go. Why? Why help me? He paused, considering the question. The honest answer, that he recognized the look of someone with nowhere else to turn, seemed too personal to share with a stranger. Even a beautiful, mysterious stranger who had walked 15 kilometers through a toxic storm to knock on his door. Because you asked, he said instead, and left her to find whatever comfort she could in hot water and clean clothes. Back in the control room, Marcus stared at his monitoring stations without really seeing them. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. His sanctuary had been breached, his isolation ended by 3 simple knocks and a plea for basic human or alien decency. He found himself listening for the sound of running water, wondering about the story behind those exhausted eyes, and trying not to think about how long it had been since he'd shared his space with another living being. The shower ran for a long time, and Marcus discovered he didn't mind the sound at all. Marcus woke to the unfamiliar sound of movement in his quarters. For a moment, disorientation clouded his thoughts. He'd fallen asleep at his monitoring station again, something that hadn't happened in months. But the soft rustle of fabric and the gentle clink of dishes reminded him that his solitary existence had been interrupted by storm and circumstance. Kira stood at the small kitchenette, her back to him as she worked. She'd found the emergency clothing locker, and the standard-issue gray jumpsuit hung loose on her slender frame, the sleeves rolled up to accommodate her shorter stature. Her silver hair, now clean and dry, caught the morning light streaming through the observation windows. The storm had passed during the night, leaving Kepler 442b's sky a brilliant amber dotted with high, wispy clouds. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said, sitting up and running his hands through his disheveled hair. She turned, and he was struck again by how different she looked, clean and rested. Her skin held that subtle blue-green tint more vibrantly now, and there were delicate patterns along her temples that resembled scales but moved like living tattoos when she smiled. "I couldn't sleep," she said, gesturing toward the food processor. "Your rehydration units are more sophisticated than anything we had on the mining platforms. I thought I'd make breakfast as a thank you." Marcus stood, stretching muscles stiff and sleeping in his chair. "Mining platforms?" A shadow crossed her features. "Where I came from. Before ... She turned back to the food processor, focusing intently on the steaming bowls she was preparing. It's not important, but it was important, Marcus realized. Everything about her was important in a way that made his chest tight and his carefully constructed emotional barriers feel suddenly fragile. He'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of not caring, of treating his job as nothing more than data points and routine maintenance. Yet here was Kira, moving through his sterile quarters like she belonged there, and he found himself wanting to know every detail of her story. "Try this," she said, offering him a bowl. The contents looked like standard protein porridge, but when he tasted it, complex flavors bloomed on his tongue, something floral and sweet, with an underlying earthiness he couldn't identify. "How did you do that?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "The food processors don't have these flavor profiles programmed." Kira's smile was shy but pleased. "Spices," she said, pulling a small pouch from her jumpsuit pocket. "I've been carrying seeds and dried roots from home since I left. They still work with human food." Home. The word hung between them, loaded with implication. Marcus sat across from her at the small table, noting how she kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting something or someone to appear. "Where is home?" he asked gently. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Kepler 186F, the mining colony on Proxima Station." Her fingers traced patterns on the table's surface. "Was home. Until the corporate wars reached us." Marcus knew about the corporate wars, distant conflicts between mega-corporations fighting over resource rights and territorial claims. The news feeds mentioned them occasionally, but they seemed abstract, removed from the day-to-day reality of atmospheric processing and maintenance schedules. What happened? Kira's dark eyes met his, and he saw depths of pain that made his own self-imposed isolation seem trivial by comparison. "Consolidated Mining decided our asteroid belt was worth more than our lives," she said with bitter precision. "They couldn't legally remove an established colony, so they manufactured a safety crisis. Sabotaged our air processors, contaminated the water supply, then offered to evacuate us to temporary facilities while they fixed the problems." She took a sip of her own bowl, her hands trembling slightly. The temporary facilities were labor camps. Work quotas, restricted movement, communication blackouts. They separated families, assigned us to different shifts so we couldn't organize. Said it was for efficiency. Her laugh was hollow. "Took us 6 months to realize they'd already stripped our home bare. Nothing left to go back to." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How did you escape?" "I didn't escape," Kira said. "I survived." "There's a difference." She stood abruptly, walking to the observation windows. The morning light painted her profile in gold and amber, making the living patterns on her skin shimmer like water. The labor ship transporting U.S. to a new facility had mechanical failures. Real ones, this time. Life support started failing, and the corporate overseers took the only functioning escape pods. She pressed her palm against the glass. Left 200 of us to die in space. Marcus joined her at the window, close enough to see the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her fingers curled against the smooth surface. But you didn't die. Emergency protocols activated. The ship's AI jettisoned cargo pods with basic life support to reduce mass and extend power. 50 of us made it into those pods before the main ship lost atmosphere. Her voice was steady now, matter of fact. We drifted for 8 days before a salvage crew found us. 12 survivors. Jesus, Marcus breathed. The salvage crew was pragmatic. They couldn't afford to transport refugees for free, but they needed workers. So we worked our passage system by system, picking up odd jobs and trying to earn enough credits for legitimate transport. She turned to face him. That was 18 months ago. I've been working my way toward the outer colonies ever since, hoping to find somewhere that doesn't ask too many questions about documentation. Marcus studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself despite the obvious exhaustion and trauma. She was stronger than anyone had a right to be after what she'd endured. The storm last night, he said. You weren't just seeking shelter. You were running. She nodded slowly. The transport I was working on got raided by corporate security 3 days ago. Looking for stolen property, their term for escaped workers. I grabbed what I could and ran. She pulled the small credit chip from her pocket, turning it over in her palm. 3 credits. Everything I have left from 18 months of trying to rebuild a life. The weight of her story settled over them like a physical presence. Marcus thought about his own reasons for choosing isolation, how his past traumas had driven him to seek solitude and safety in routine. But Kira's pain made his own seem almost luxurious by comparison. He'd had the privilege of choosing his isolation, while hers had been forced upon her by circumstances beyond her control. You can't stay here, he said, hating the words even as he spoke them. Not officially. The colony runs identification checks, and if corporate security is looking for you ... I know, she said quietly. I'm not asking for permanent sanctuary, just ... Time to figure out what comes next. Maybe earn enough for transport to the Rim colonies, somewhere beyond corporate reach. Marcus found himself nodding before he'd fully processed the implications. How long? A few days? A week at most. She met his eyes. I know I'm asking a lot. If they catch me here, you could lose your job, face charges for harboring an undocumented person. I understand if you can't take that risk. But even as she said it, Marcus knew his decision was already made. Maybe it was the way she'd trusted him enough to share her story, or the careful way she moved through his space, as if afraid to disturb anything, or simply the fact that for the first time in years, his quarters didn't feel empty. The morning shift arrives in 3 hours, he said. We'll need to be careful, but the night rotation gives us time to work out details. Relief flooded her features, followed immediately by something that might have been hope. Thank you, she whispered. I promise I won't cause trouble. I'm good at staying invisible. You don't have to be invisible here, Marcus said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Not with me. Something shifted in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps, of shared loneliness and the strange comfort they'd found in each other's company. Kira stepped closer, close enough that he could see flecks of silver in her dark eyes, close enough to catch the faint, pleasant scent that seemed to emanate from her skin. Marcus, she said softly, why are you really helping me? And don't say it's because I asked. People ask for help all the time, and most get turned away. He considered deflecting, giving her another easy answer that would preserve his emotional distance. But her honesty deserved honesty in return. Because I know what it's like to be alone, he said. To feel like the universe has written you off as expendable. And because ... double quotes. He hesitated and took the leap. Because I haven't felt this alive in years. Kira's breath caught. For a moment, they stood frozen in the morning light. Two damaged souls recognizing something precious and fragile blooming between them. Then the proximity alarm chimed, indicating an approaching transport. Morning shift was arriving early. Hide in the storage bay, Marcus said quickly, his mind shifting into operational mode. Stay quiet until they leave. We'll figure out the rest tonight. She nodded and started to move, then paused. Marcus? When this is over, when I find a way to move on, ... She seemed to struggle with the words. I want you to know that this, what you're doing for me, it matters. More than you know. She disappeared into the storage bay, just as the transport's landing beacon activated. Marcus smoothed his hair, straightened his rumpled clothes, and tried to look like a man who'd spent a quiet night monitoring atmospheric readings instead of having his world quietly revolutionized by a stranger's trust. But as he prepared to face his colleagues and begin the delicate work of protecting Kira's presence, he realized that she was wrong about one thing. This wasn't just about her moving on anymore. It was about both of them finding a way to move forward together. The morning shift brought Marcus's least favorite colleague supervisor Reynolds, a meticulous woman in her 50s, who treated every minor deviation from protocol as a personal affront. She swept into the control room with her usual brisk efficiency, tablet in hand, already reviewing the overnight reports before she'd even shed her jacket. Atmospheric readings were stable through the storm, Marcus said, keeping his voice carefully neutral as he prepared the shift handover. No significant fluctuations in any sector. Good. Reynolds settled into her chair, eyes already scanning his logged entries. Though I see you had an unusual power draw around 3 o'clock. Emergency systems activated? Marcus's heart skipped, but his expression remained steady. Brief decontamination cycle in the auxiliary port. Debris impact triggered the sensors during the storm. It wasn't, technically, a lie. The decontamination cycle had run when Kira entered. But Reynolds's sharp gaze lingered on him longer than usual. Debris, she repeated. Heavy enough to trigger full decon protocols? Storm was intense, Marcus replied with a shrug. Better safe than sorry with contamination risks. Reynolds made a note on her tablet, and Marcus forced himself not to fidget. After 3 years of predictable night shifts, any deviation would catch her attention. But before she could probe deeper, her comm unit chirped with an incoming priority message. Colony control, she answered crisply. Reynolds here. Marcus busied himself with gathering his personal items, but he couldn't help overhearing fragments of the conversation. Corporate security. Search protocols. Escaped worker. His blood ran cold. Understood, Reynolds was saying. We'll implement additional security sweeps immediately. Yes, I'll brief all staff on the identification parameters. She ended the call and turned to Marcus with the predatory focus of someone who'd found something interesting to hunt. Change of plans. Chun. Corporate security issued an alert about an escaped worker non-human female suspected to be in this sector. All facilities are implementing enhanced security protocols until she's located. Marcus kept his expression carefully bland. Enhanced protocols? Additional ID checks, thermal scans of all areas, restriction of access to sensitive zones. Reynolds pulled up a holographic display showing Kira's face, not a perfect likeness, but close enough to be dangerous. Have you seen anyone matching this description? Marcus studied the image with what he hoped looked like professional interest. No. Should I be concerned about facility security? The subject isn't considered dangerous, just valuable corporate property that needs to be returned to proper custody. Reynolds's tone was matter-of-fact, but Marcus caught the slight distaste in her expression. Even she seemed uncomfortable with the phrasing. "I'll keep an eye out," Marcus said. "Actually, I'm extending your shift through the day rotation. We need experienced personnel monitoring security feeds while the additional sweeps are conducted." Reynolds was already pulling up duty rosters. "Hazard pay, of course, and you can take tomorrow night off to compensate." Marcus's mind raced. Extended shift meant he couldn't leave to warn Kira, couldn't help her relocate to a safer hiding spot. She'd be trapped in the storage bay for potentially 12 more hours while corporate security teams swept the colony. "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." The next 4 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Marcus monitored his usual atmospheric readings while simultaneously tracking the security teams' progress through the colony via the communication networks. They were systematic, thorough, and getting closer to his facility with each passing hour. During a brief moment when Reynolds stepped away to coordinate with colony control, Marcus managed to send a subtle signal to the storage bay, a pattern of ventilation adjustments that he hoped Kira would recognize as a warning to stay hidden. By midday, the security teams had reached the outer facilities. Marcus watched through external cameras as uniformed officers methodically searched the maintenance sheds and auxiliary buildings surrounding his atmospheric station. His mouth went dry as he realized they would inevitably want to search the station itself. "Marcus," Reynolds called from her position at the communications console. "Corporate security is requesting facility access. They'll be here within the hour. Should I prepare anything special?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Standard cooperation protocols. Grant them access to all areas except the reactor core. They'll need special clearance for that." She paused, studying him with those sharp eyes. "You seem nervous. Something wrong?" "Just don't like having security teams tramping through sensitive equipment," Marcus lied smoothly. "Bad experience at my previous posting." Reynolds nodded, apparently satisfied. But as she turned back to her console, Marcus caught her reflection in his monitor screen. She was still watching him. The security team arrived exactly 53 minutes later. 4 officers in corporate uniforms, led by a stern-faced woman with lieutenant's insignia, who introduced herself as Valdez. They were polite but thorough, requesting detailed facility schematics and maintenance logs. "We'll need to conduct thermal sweeps of all areas," Valdez explained as her team began setting up scanning equipment. "The subject may be using infrastructure to mask her heat signature." Marcus's heart hammered as he watched them methodically work through the control areas, staff quarters, and maintenance sections. The storage bay where Kira was hidden appeared on their sweep list, marked as a low-priority area due to its automated lock system. "This storage area," one of the technicians called out, pointing to the bay on his scanner. "I'm getting some unusual thermal readings." Marcus felt his world tilt. But before panic could fully set in, Reynolds spoke up. "That's the emergency supply bay. Climate-controlled for sensitive equipment storage. The thermal variations are normal automated systems, cycle temperature and humidity to prevent component degradation." The technician checked his readings again, then nodded. "Makes sense. The patterns are too regular to be organic." Marcus nearly sagged with relief, but he caught Reynolds watching him again in his peripheral vision. Her expression was thoughtful, calculating. The search continued for another 2 hours. They found nothing. Because there was nothing to find, Kira had somehow managed to conceal herself completely, even from thermal scanning equipment. As the security team prepared to leave, Valdez handed Marcus a direct communication code. "If you see anything suspicious, contact me immediately," she said. "The subject is considered high-value corporate property. There's a substantial reward for information leading to her recovery." After they left, the facility felt strangely empty despite Reynolds still being present. Marcus tried to return to his normal routine, but his thoughts kept drifting to Kira, hiding in the storage bay, wondering if she was safe, if she'd heard the security team's search, if she understood how close they'd come to discovery. "Marcus," Reynolds said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. They moved through the facility corridors, past the monitoring stations and life support systems, until they reached the observation deck overlooking the colony's main habitation domes. 15 years. I've been running atmospheric operations, Reynolds said, leaning against the reinforced railing. You develop instincts about people, about when something doesn't add up. Marcus's throat went dry. I'm not sure what you mean. That debris impact last night? The power draw patterns. Your behavior during the security sweep. She turned to face him directly. I've seen your psychological profile, Chun. You're not the type to get nervous around authority figures. But today, you were sweating bullets. For a moment, they stood in silence. Marcus weighed his options: denial, misdirection, outright lies. But something in Reynolds' expression made him reconsider. If you have something to say, just say it, he said finally. Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, studying the colony spread out below them. I have a daughter, she said unexpectedly. Married to a mining engineer on Kepler 452b. They have 2 children I've never met because corporate policy restricts family. Visitation between different territorial zones. Her voice carried a weight of old grief. The corporations own us, Marcus. Own our labor, our movement, our relationships. They decide who deserves basic human dignity and who doesn't. Marcus stared at her, seeing his supervisor in an entirely new light. The thermal readings in the storage bay, Reynolds continued. They weren't from climate control systems, but they also weren't from any escaped corporate property hiding inside. She met his eyes. They were from someone taking shelter with a friend who understands what it means to be alone. Understanding flooded through Marcus like cold water. You know, I know that whatever you're doing, whoever you're helping, it's none of my business as long as it doesn't compromise facility operations. Reynolds straightened. I also know that corporate security will be back tomorrow for follow-up sweeps. So if someone theoretical needed to relocate to somewhere safer, tonight would be the time to do it. She started to walk back toward the control room, then paused. Marcus? That reward Valdez mentioned? It's 50,000 credits. More than most of us make in 2 years. Her smile was grim. Good thing I've never been motivated by money. That evening, after Reynolds left and the facility returned to its familiar nighttime quiet, Marcus made his way to the storage bay with shaking hands. He keyed in the access code and found Kira sitting in the corner between 2 supply crates, looking pale but alert. How much did you hear? He asked. Enough, she said, standing stiffly. They were looking for me specifically. Corporate security, not just colony patrol. Reynolds knows you're here. Kira's eyes widened in alarm, but Marcus quickly explained the conversation on the observation deck. As he spoke, he watched relief and gratitude war with fear across her features. She's right about tomorrow, Kira said when he finished. They'll be back, probably with better equipment. I have to leave. Where will you go? I don't know yet, but I can't stay here and put you at risk. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion and stress written in every line of her body. Marcus, what you've done for me. He silenced her with a gentle touch to her cheek, marveling at the way her skin seemed to warm under his fingers. We'll figure it out together, he said. I'm not letting you face this alone. Kira leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they held a depth of emotion that made his chest tight. Together, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Together, Marcus confirmed. And as they stood in the dim storage bay, surrounded by the quiet hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of the colony's heartbeat, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed world of isolation and routine had been completely transformed by 3 credits and a plea for shelter. Now they just had to figure out How to build something new from the pieces.